Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to Impolite Company. I'm your host, Matthew Best. And you've probably heard the old adage that you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics in polite company. Well, I don't think that served American society or the church well, and it's caused people to avoid topics and yield the conversation to those who want a theocracy. So this show is about where we have a healthy conversation about religion and politics and tackle difficult topics, controversial topics in constructive ways. Thanks for listening in. Feel free to submit comments and questions to our email, which is contactimpolitecompany@gmail.com. And while you're at that, if you want to support the show, you can do that through buymeacoffee.com/impolite company. Anything that you give is going to be reinvested right back in to try and improve the show. So I appreciate that. Or if you don't want to give directly to me, you can support the church that I pastor, which is Christ Lutheran Church. We have free health clinics and that serve the neighborhood. And since 2018, we've had 100,000 visits. So it's a lot of impact. And you can go to christharrisburg.org if you'd prefer to support us that way. The show airs every first and third Sunday each month from 2 to 3 Eastern, and it's on wgcpr.live. And you can follow us on YouTube and Facebook and all that other kind of great stuff. So today I am excited also to welcome my guest, Diane Nilan, who is with us today. And she is the founder and president of Hear Us. And the mission, I love this mission, Diane, to give voice and visibility to the now, and you had that in parentheses, now 7 million plus children and youth living in cars and shelters on the streets or doubled up with other families. Welcome, Diane.
Well, Matthew, thank you very much, and I'm honored to be your first guest, even though I got it kind of by default by being Pat Lamarche. So, but yeah, if I can tag team with her and be with you, that I win.
There you go, right? And yeah, not you're not second prize, believe me. But
I
and
knew
Pat,
you were
what?
giving prizes,
No,
so
no. Oh yeah, big prizes. I have a huge budget, you know.
yeah,
Um,
okay.
no, Pat was going to be our first guest, and she's actually at a funeral. And I had asked her. I said, "Well, who should I invite?" And she said, "Well, Diane would be." There was the first name that came off her lips, and I thought, "Yeah, that makes a lot of sense." So Diane, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Hear Us, so you can kind of explain a little bit what do you all do, and what's the focus?
Well, the all part, I'll clarify that right away. The all is me. Um, so, and actually, is a follow up of me working with families that were homeless in shelter, and also working to get rights so that kids that don't have homes could go to school. So, Hear Us is just basically me trying to be the instrument to give families that are homeless a voice and let them be heard and let their stories be told and get those stories out as far and wide as I can. And I've been doing this now. I've lived in a van and traveled around the country for close to 20 years. And so I'm just kind of thinking I'm starting to get the hang of this and but sadly the need is greater than ever, and my job, people look at me when I say there's over 7 million kids that are homeless, because that's not a number that gets used much. And
Right.
so I can document, as much as anybody, where those numbers, come from. And it's a kind of thing that, I want people to be horrified by that, because that means 7 million kids are going to grow up at great risk of homelessness as adults, which none of us would want to see. And it's a mission that keeps me busy. I make films, I write books, I do talks, I do sessions with educators, and talk to lawmakers when I can. And do whatever I can do to, make a difference.
Yeah,
And
and that 7 million number, let's talk about that for a little bit, right? Because I know that's not the official definition according to the Department of Housing. They have their limited definition that for me, I've always said that there's a reason why things get counted a certain way, so that we don't have to necessarily deal with the full problem. So I don't know if you want to mention a little bit about how do you come up with 7 million? Because a lot of people are gonna be like, what? That's far more than what we hear reported on the news.
yeah, well, it is far more. And actually, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD as we call them, they are counting just the people that are in shelters or those who've been identified living on the streets for a long time. Families don't tend to do that, and there's very few shelters, relatively speaking, for families, and they also hide intentionally in a lot of cases, or out of shame in most cases, because the family homelessness is something that, the families are worried about the kids being taken away. They don't maybe sometimes think of themselves as homeless. I've had families say, well, we're just going through hard times. I'm like,
Mm,
wow, hard times are really hard times. And so you start looking behind the scenes, and then you start realizing that there's a lot more kids that are in homeless situations, and especially the youth, the teens and um, the young adults that still qualify as homeless. And there's literally 4 million, 4.7 million or something, nobody counts noses, I'll just say that. But the schools do. The schools count the students and that are identified as homeless, and that's probably half of really who's out there. And they don't count the babies and toddlers. They don't count the kids that are older, that are still, in their young or old teens and young adults. So there are that many out there, and it's a number that I'll stand by, because and we need to do something, whether it was 1 million or 7 million.
right, right. And I think that's really helpful for people to get a sense of, how the numbers come about. And there's a lot of debate about that, of course. There's the pit count, which is done in January, um, which I always wonder. I'm like, hmm, done in January. When people are
And it's
trying
so
to stay warm.
warm.
But it is what it is, and you got to work with it, right? I mean, that's just how things are right now. So, I did want to ask you about, because so this is a show that really kind of focuses in on this intersection between religion and politics. And I always like to say that, this is not about me trying to create some kind of theocracy. I am opposed to the idea of theocracy. I
So
think,
that's
I
refreshing.
think,
Okay.
I think history has shown that that does not turn out well.
Yeah.
But the idea of being able to have conversations and kind of touching on those things. So I'm just wondering, where have you seen, and this is where I'm like very open to, there's good, there's bad, and there's ugly. And so feel free to start whichever one you're most comfortable with. Where have you seen, especially when we're talking about homelessness, this intersection of religion and politics, and maybe, where has it not been so well, and then maybe where have you seen it work at least decently?
Well, Matthew, I will say that for 15 years I ran shelters in Illinois, and those shelters were they're operated primarily by faith-based groups that were involved on a committed basis once a month, providing volunteers and food. And they made it possible for our shelter to operate. So I want to give my hats off to the all the people who do that kind of service across the country, because it's one of those things where without that kind of help, we would not have shelters. I mean, literally right now, you would just take all the shelters that we do have in this country and cut them by probably 80%. So
Sure.
that's one thing I'll say good for the faith communities. And just I'll stay on the good side for now.
Okay.
But the good thing is too that these volunteers, I was in the hoity-toity area around Naperville, Aurora, Illinois, where, it's pretty affluent area. Naperville is anyhow, and volunteers would come to our shelter, which was in a city incinerator building, if you can just grab that image.
Wow.
And it was fixed up, so it wasn't the the incinerator as we know it. But anyhow, they would come over and they would try it out. They were all scared, and they would come in and they'd kind of go like, "Well, wait, this isn't nearly as scary as I thought it would
Hmm.
be." And then they kind of, get to talk to people and see families and all. And then they're kind of going, "Hey, Diane, what's the deal with homelessness?" And so I'd get a chance to talk about it either informally or at their congregations. And I welcome that opportunity because a lot of people don't understand homelessness. So faith communities offered that opportunity to me to, spread the word about homelessness. And that really made a difference. And where it makes a difference, which I hope we're not getting away from. I've not run a shelter for a while, so I'm not sure. But the people that were volunteers then could talk to their lawmakers or elected officials, and we encouraged that greatly. And we got some legislation passed because we had the volunteers from Naperville calling their elected officials saying, "Hey, this homeless education law that's being talked about in Springfield, let's pass it. Let's get behind it." And we got great things happening. So faith communities can really do a lot. And then the other side of it is people are like, "Well, the churches have got it, so we don't need government to get behind it." And,
Right.
and then you go, "Wait, wait, wait, no, churches don't have it." And
Right.
it's like it's bigger than that. And you and your clinic, oh my God, 100,000 you said?
Yeah, 100,000 since 2018, but it's really kind of sticks on onto your point that there's no way we could do this without partners.
Oh my goodness.
So there's three clinics, and one of them, like there's partners with like Penn State Health and UPMC and Delta Dental, and there's lots of different organizations that make it possible. Like this is not volunteers from the church doing things. These are professionals, medical professionals who are doing this, and it's
Yeah.
a partnership together with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just I really like to
Yeah, no,
clarify
no,
that.
I mean, that's important for people to understand. It's like you're one leg of a three-legged
Right,
stool.
right,
And, government needs to be as involved, if not more so, because they have a few more dollars than you do probably. It's like we need teamwork on this issue of homelessness, and now more than ever we do, because housing is such an issue that even middle income people are starting to go, "Wow, my rent
yeah,
just went up $500,"
right.
and it's the kind of thing we've let government slide. And I always say I'm bipartisan pissed, so
That's a good way to put it. I love that.
it's not like I'm, one way or the other on this. I'm for the country that is supposed to be for the people. And our government is supposed to be a government of the people, for the people, by the people, or something like that.
Right, right. Yeah, I
Um,
think I've heard of that before.
yeah, yeah. So, well, so I think, it's faith communities stepped up, and they have, for modern homelessness time, and if not, it would be even worse.
So I'm curious if you ever heard the phrase, because this is what happens when that I can speak for myself and for some of my colleagues, other clergy, who, when we'll talk about something in an advocacy realm, there are folks that oftentimes I think it's because it's the advocacy that some people just don't like, and they'll say, "Oh, you're just being political."
Oh,
That has no place in church. And I'm just wondering if you have heard a similar line and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of crazy things when you're trying to start shelters, as I've been involved in doing, and they're like, "Oh no, we don't need that. That's too political." And you're just kind of going, "No, really? You need a place to sleep." And um it's any excuse to keep from having to do the work is what I think some people will throw at you. And I think it's fear too.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wrote a book, my first book that I wrote after I left the shelter, and it was based on many conversations I've had, middle of the night volunteer conversations about people saying, "Gosh, I was really scared to come here. I
Hmm.
didn't want to catch homelessness." And
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was like, wow, so I wrote a book, Crossing the Line, Taking Steps to End Homelessness, because it is crossing the line. It was like they had to cross the line, their comfort line. They had to cross the line of walking into a shelter for the first time. And I can remember when I first walked into the shelter, and I walked in not knowing anything about it, and I was kind of taken aback by the fact that it wasn't all wild and crazy and,
Hmm.
stuff going on. So, um, yeah, so I think people, would like to make it political. That way they wouldn't have to be a part of it. But
Hmm.
really, folks, we need to be a part of politics anyhow, and we need to be informed, and we need to be involved, because politics is what runs our country. And if we don't take an active, informed role, then we're going to get what we get, and it's going to be ugly.
Yeah, and I think this also, I've done this before where I have expressed to people the difference between politics and partisan,
Yeah.
because I think there's an important difference. I mean, obviously the two are very much related to each other, but political does not equal partisan. And I think a lot of times we're in such a polarized society that people just automatically, when they hear the word politics, they automatically assume R's and D's, and so it's got to be pick a side and that's it.
And
And that's not like the root of the word politics means poly, it's many, and it has to do with the people. It's about how to govern it as a people and make decisions and those type of things.
one of
um
my favorite Republicans, and she was a legislator, a respected longtime legislator, Republican from an affluent Naperville area, Mary Lou Collishaw. She she said, I don't usually remember quotes,
yeah.
scriptural or whatever, but she said, "All Republicans don't think alike. Some don't think at all."
Yeah,
Now
and
that
I
I
think
remember. But
you could you could
I
say
think
that about Democrats too. I think that's a
absolutely, yeah,
universal
yeah,
type
yeah.
of thing.
Remember that
That's pretty funny.
bipartisan fist thing? That's
Right, right.
but that just, she was very realistic about the
Yeah.
fact that some people just don't use their little brains that God gave them. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of books that I've been reading about polarization recently, and actually one of my future guests is gonna I'm gonna have on to talk about this, and they're talking about the idea of a lot of polarization exists because of not really listening to what is being expressed, but making assumptions based on what we're hearing and through the lens that we see the world. And so, a lot of things could be different if we just stopped and said, okay, that sounds crazy. Tell me more about what it is that you're actually, what the actual concern is, or what you're upset about, or whatever the case may be. Are you just venting, or is this a legitimate thing? And I know that that's a real tough thing for folks to get on board with, because we have our tribes, and it's easy to be like, oh, those people on that side over there are just terrible and they're wrong, and if they just got it right.
Yeah. Yeah, and and just the whole topic of homelessness is one that there is just ripe for misunderstanding, we'll say, and
Yeah.
worse. And the stereotypes, and it's just clumping all the people together in one category. And that's what's really kept me going, is the fact that the families, when they talk about their experience of homelessness and what caused it and what's keeping them homeless and all, it's something that really, their stories and the way they tell it, it's just it changes people's minds. Or people say, oh, I have an uncle that had that kind of problem. Or I know a family that's going through this now. And so it is breaking down those barriers that are just not true to begin with.
Yeah. So I do want to ask you, because again, I'm wide open on this, is where have you seen, I think it's important to talk about this too. Where have you seen this kind of unhealthy mixing of religion and politics, and what made it unhealthy? I think that the second part is the really important part for people to kind of, because it's easy for folks to kind of just throw stuff out there, but then to be like, well, why is this unhealthy? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, and I can point, since I was born and raised Catholic,
Yeah.
I point to some of what really bothered me about the Catholic Church, the institutional
Hmm.
church. And to also say that there's a lot of people within the institutional church that are doing good things. But
Sure.
you know,
Sure.
I the bishops, when they would get together and have make decisions about poverty and welfare and even homelessness, um, you just see such a vast area where they don't know what they're talking about. And I would say
Mm,
the same thing about many of the Supreme Court justices right now. They don't know anything about homelessness at all, and they just absolutely made decisions about it that are going to have an impact, as the bishops do. And I'll pick on the bishops because
sure.
they're big boys and they can, well, they can handle it.
Sure.
And it is the fact that if we get to the message of Jesus or other, leaders, you just kind of go, wait, we are so off track that,
Mm,
that we forget that humanity is what we're supposed to be caring about. And we're supposed to not judge people, and we're supposed to be kind and love people. And even just taking the simple messages that aren't simple to do, but you just kind of go, how can we be believers of, I'll use Christianity because that's what
sure.
I like the best, but how can we be believers of Jesus when we're advocating for, this kind of cruel treatment of people? Um, you know, Immigrants being one, and it's just like that whole issue. People need to understand more before they open their mouths. And
Yeah,
I
it reminds me of, I just saw a quote from a pastor, and I don't remember who it was, but essentially, and it was just shocking to me. He said that the ways of Jesus just don't work anymore for, because this is too important for us. And I was like, I don't even know what to say to that, because I'm like, how I'm just kind of, I'm
like, what
speechless.
were
It's
you
one of the
saying?
few times that I'm speechless, right? Which I'm like, you're a pastor and you're saying the guy that you're following,
Yeah, I was-
supposedly that you're following in his ways, that way doesn't work. And so we need to adopt the ways of the world or the empire or whatever you want to call it. Just for this is too important. Uh, and it was just dumbfounded by such a statement.
well, and that's, I'm sure we could come up with 8 million
Oh yeah.
examples of how people will listen to somebody in charge and just listen to what they say and go, oh, okay. And, it absolutely defies logic. I mean, I'm a philosophy major. I guess that's where I come down on, and it's like, wait, there's no logic at all in that, but you're you putting it out there like it's the truth, and it's not. And so I think, people are tired of listening, or they just don't listen, or, it's just, and then the leaders that come in that we have a candidate for governor in North Carolina where I'm living now, and I'm like, what he's saying is like so illegal, much
Hmm.
less, it's like killing people. And you're like, wait,
Oh
no,
gosh.
we don't just kill people just because we disagree with them. So,
Right. Yeah, that
but
doesn't end well.
yeah, but I read a history of the Ku Klux Klan um in the 1920s,
Okay.
and it was really, really I'll think of the name of the book in a minute. It was by oh, Tim Egan. Yeah, Timothy Egan. So I'll get the name of the book maybe. But anyhow, he documented how the faith communities, hook, line, and sinker, fell for the Ku Klux Klan. I
Sure.
mean, he was looking mostly in Indiana, but looked at other parts of the country. But you just kind of go, wow, and this is happening today,
Yeah,
which
this it
the other
reminds
day.
me of Robert P. Jones. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's one of the it's like PP or PRRI or something like that. Anyway, he had a book published also called White Too Long, which is the story of race and Christianity, and he had stories in there that were again just kind of mind blowing. One that sticks out of my head was I think it took place in Minnesota or somewhere pretty far north, and it was the story about there was a church service, and they hear about the love of Jesus and all this, and then immediately after the service, a posse went out and found I think a couple of black men, brought them back to right outside of the
Oh,
church, and there was a hanging tree, and they
oh,
lynched these men, and there was like a picnic, and like it was as if like this kind of summer church picnic atmosphere, and then there's like stories that go with that as far as um there's always a profit involved, and I don't mean that as far as a person, but
yeah,
money so there were actually people who took pictures, and so people would pose with the hung body, and then they would create postcards, and
yeah,
so then people lynching postcards. I'm
yeah,
48 years old, and I'm thinking I'm just hearing about this now.
yeah, right. That's,
Why why
yeah,
why is this only now? And like that doesn't and I see that, I'm like, how can you sit in church and hear the love of Jesus? Maybe that's not what's actually being proclaimed, and then turn around and do something like that. To me, there seems a huge disconnect, but I'm also making some assumptions as far as, well, what's actually being taught. I don't know what was being
I,
said.
I'm kind of thinking you're safe making some assumptions there
Yeah,
because
right.
the action speaks louder than words, and
Yeah,
it's and it's whether it's religion, and but it's like we have this all the time where we can just ignore and bully and ignore it goes on, and it is a human condition. And I guess I always keep hoping that the believers of faiths that have love as their centerpiece, that they will, maybe at least in a flawed sort of way, try to put love in action. And,
mm,
and that's really what I kept seeing in the shelter, and what I kept seeing all along is when love is in action. However, you don't have to be a member of a particular denomination to put that love into action. But
sure.
when you see love in action, you see goodness. And it's just and it comes out in so many different ways. But, people who are without a place to live, when somebody is kind to them, even if it's just a minimal thing, it has a great impact. And it would change people's lives. I mean, I had people at our shelter that were hardcore homeless people, that we would be afraid of. And I get into conversations with them, and they're always pretty honest with me, and I was honest with them, and it'd be a private conversation, and they'd go, Diane, it was I just couldn't believe that volunteer last night when she was giving me salad, she said, nice things to me, and
Mm,
and it touched their humanity in a way that hasn't been. So, we can't underestimate our impact on other people and the impact that it has on us. And that is the love in action. I'm sure you preach love in action. I know you well enough to know that that's probably one of your things.
actually,
And
just today, this morning, the reading was from First John 3, and one of the key verses in there was, "How can you see a brother or sister in need and not do something to help them if you have the love of God in you?" So
yeah,
you're like
okay, yeah.
giving part of my sermon
All right.
from
So
this morning.
so I was making an assumption and I was right.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah, and it does come back to people. And a lot of times again the late night conversations with volunteers and they'd say, my brother was he lived on the streets for a while and he died and it was really sad and I felt like I couldn't do anything, but this is what I'm doing just
Hmm.
to give back to others. And that ripple effect, we have no idea what an impact that is, but it goes pretty far, and we can't stop doing that because if we do, that means we're taking love out of the equation of what moves action in our world. And
Right.
I'm kind of thinking that we'd be in deeper trouble if we do that. So we
Yeah.
need to keep that love
I,
rolling along.
what I hear from you is this idea of a theology of love and a politics of love,
Oh,
and that's kind of where the intersection can happen in a healthy way. Um,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what I've also talked about too is the idea of love. People, if anybody's ever been to a wedding, they've heard First Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, right? All that, like that's all I got to say, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I know that."
Yeah, yeah, I can recite that one.
Right? It doesn't matter if you're religious or not.
Yeah,
People know that one, and that is the essence of that is invitational. There's no use of force
yeah,
in that, and that's what I hear. What you're saying is kind of this politics of love. And oftentimes, again, this is where people would so many people use words and assume that other people have the same definitions.
yeah,
This is one of my things is I'm always like, wait a minute, let's what do we mean by freedom? What do we mean by love in this case? And it's not wishy or it's not this kind of like just nice warm feeling. It is very much tied to action. That there's a willful and intentional action done in a way that is beneficial to somebody else and yourself as well, kind of this combination of the two.
absolutely. And it does not need to be perfect. And I think that that's where we, are like, oh, I can't do that because I can't do this, and I can't, and you just kind of go, wait, no, anything you do will be one step further towards love for other people and
Yeah.
yourself. And, and I think I always get back to the whole idea of trauma.
Hmm.
And and I have to say, I when I ran a shelter in the 90s mostly, I really didn't know anything about trauma at all. It wasn't talked about in
Sure.
shelter running life. And when you start understanding more about trauma, and I highly recommend the book by Gabor Mate, the Myth of Normal.
Yep.
It's his latest book, and you just kind of go, oh, well, that
Yeah.
explains a whole lot about me and my
Right.
family and it's like, and it's big trauma and little trauma and all,
Yep.
and I don't want to get into a whole trauma lecture here, but
Sure.
it's like when you realize how people are impacted by trauma when they're infants. And
Yeah.
the book that we're coming out with in a couple months is The Three Melissas.
Hmm.
taking the practical guide to surviving family homelessness. And
Okay.
this is three women who experienced homelessness as actually all of them as younger people, but also as moms. And it talks about it's their way of giving hints to other families in similar situations about how to survive homelessness with their kids. And but when you realize how many people are impacted by trauma, as these three talk about in their own lives and their kids, it's like we can't expect people to be perfect. We can't be surprised that so and so has a drug problem, so and so has an alcohol problem, so and so has a mental health problem, and those are the stereotypes. But it's the kind of thing where we have to look at our own lives too, I think, and kind of go, well, that sort of explains why I do this, and
Right.
um, and look at ourselves with love, though. I mean, it's you don't say, okay, all you millions and millions of people that experience trauma, you're no good anymore. We're going to get rid
Right.
of, and that's basically what some people would like to see happen, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. You're spot on with that. There's a lot of, I spent a lot of time focusing on trauma also, in a lot of ways. I mean, even just the fact of the clinics here are kind of they're last resorts for folks, that have slipped through the rest of the healthcare system and they end up at our door. Um, and for a variety of reasons. And so there's a ton of trauma that is going on. That's why healing is so very important, and that takes time, and it's so many different ways for folks. One of the things that I also often talk about is that at least as a society and certainly as a church, we're terrible at mourning loss, right? And like as a church, we're really good at doing funerals, but we're terrible at mourning,
Hmm.
which is a much longer term type of thing. And I wonder if that's not the case as well in society. We're in such a hurry. Like I've talked about this as far as, people get what, 3 days when they
Yeah.
have a loss of a close loved one. And we're not talking about just anyone, but, like a parent, a spouse, a child. You get 3 days and then you better be on the fourth day, you better be back as if nothing happened.
Get over it.
and
Yeah.
and it's like that's insane.
Yeah.
That's literally insane that
Mhm.
you're going to expect that somebody isn't traumatized by a huge loss that has just occurred in their life. Everything about their life has just been upset, and they don't even know what normal is yet. And then, okay, back to work.
And the physical impact on a person as well as the mental health impact is just like if we ever thought about it and paid any attention at all to what trauma does to us, I mean, it explains so much. And like these three moms that I've known for a number of years now, their health problems are directly connected
Mm,
to their traumas. And, you just kind of go, well, if we would traumatize people less,
right.
we wouldn't need so much health care and
Right.
they
Right.
wouldn't need so much this, that, and the other thing. And it's like they'd be better parents. And, so what is wrong with making sure families have a safe, decent, affordable place to live? Like, why is that not a priority in our country? Um, because really they do so much better. It's more economic to
Right.
do that. And you just kind of go, we're just so backwards that it just
Right.
it hurts my head sometimes.
Well, I think oftentimes there's a lot of folks who may end up saying, well, gosh, if we're going to just give that away, what about me? I'm paying my mortgage, my rent, whatever. Gosh, why shouldn't I just get what whatever for free? If we're going to give away everything for free, why can't I get? This reminds me of when before seminary, I worked at a food pantry, And we would hear people who would complain about, did you see their nice phone? Did you see the car they pulled up in? And they got their nails done or something, whatever type of thing. And we always reminded our volunteers, we said, number one, you don't know the whole story. And number two, I am sure, I'm willing to bet any amount of money you want that they would be happy to switch places with you.
Yeah.
If you want to get stuff for free from the food pantry.
Yeah. Yeah, because
um,
it's such really great food
it's
usually.
it's great, and and it doesn't feel like just like your entire life just got sucked out of you because you're in need to get something. Are there people that try to screw over the system? Of course there are, absolutely, right? But for the vast majority of people, they don't want to be in that line. And just because you're poor doesn't mean you can't have something nice every once in a while as well. Like that, this whole idea of, well, if you're poor, you got to have nothing. Well,
Yeah. Yeah, that works so well. But then we also want to just look at, and I'm not a math person, so I won't do any math comparisons, but those who are on the other side of the economic
right,
ladder, they get a little bit more when they have probably, I'm assuming they don't need as much as people that are poor need, but they sure do get a huge amount of tax cuts and
sure,
other things that keep them extremely wealthy. So I could, go on to a big
right.
rant about the ultra rich, but I'm not going to do that today because that would
Well, and Diane, what I've often done this as well is that it's often the amazing thing that I think there's a commonality between the those that are on the poor end of the economic spectrum and those that are on the more wealthy end of the spectrum, which may be surprising for people to think, how are they, besides their humanity? It actually has to do with money. And again, people are like, well, that's not possible, these are like so distant. It has to do with those that are poor and those that are wealthy are often just seen because of what they have or don't have. Their
Mhm.
humanity is lost.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's this realization of they're both broken just in different ways.
yeah, absolutely. And the same thing with drugs and alcohol,
Right,
like the people who abuse drugs and alcohol who are not visible,
right,
a lot more of them probably than the ones that we see on the streets that are captured by drugs and alcohol for
right.
reasons that we could explain if anybody wanted to listen.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back. You had talked about something else about 5-10 minutes ago, and we went down a different rabbit hole. Um, that's okay. But you talked about this idea of persistence, of sticking with this. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Um, maybe offer some kind of encouragement or something with, especially, we're talking about this issue of homelessness is kind of the issue that we're seeing this lens of religion and politics through. Um, and you're talking about 7+ million people, and like it just seems like this huge task or challenge or whatever you want to call it, that is going to be this kind of ongoing type of thing. And I just wonder what keeps you going, and what kind of encouragement that you can offer to folks who are listening.
Well, that's a good question, Matthew. Because I've been doing this. I mean, this was working with homelessness was not a career choice.
Yeah,
And I've been doing it probably about 40 years now. And it's the kind of thing where I just sometimes go, wow. But the times that I will, I lived in a van for 20 years, as you know,
hmm,
um, and traveled around the country. That was my only home. Traveled around the country doing films about family homelessness. You want to talk about a downer? I mean, it's in many cases, although the families were always amazingly welcoming to me and shared their stories in ways that I couldn't imagine. But I would just wake up in the morning and I would just go, how does Juliana do that when she gets up and has her 4 kids and, is in this situation. And I would just go like, oh, I'm exhausted. And I'm like, Juliana doesn't have the choice of getting up, not getting up and doing something. And it's, I guess I always have been inspired by the people that I've met that are in the situation, and seeing their goodness and realizing that what little I'm doing is something that is possibly hugely important, not only to them, but to others. And I don't know. I mean, I wish I knew what kind of an impact I was making. So I would get up in the morning and I go, let's go and just have at it because I'm just doing such a super job.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not. And I realize humanity is, we don't get to know the impact of what we're doing. And we just have to move in the right direction and know that step by step, if we don't stumble too much, we'll maybe make a difference in lives and in our own lives and other people's lives. And I just, if I'm going to try to be a part of bringing about goodness, I'm on the team and
There you go.
I don't have I don't have any, great insights in it. It just I know that what I'm doing seems to work and I'll know when I need to stop and do something else, but this, I get a lot of good feedback in ways that I wouldn't even think that I
Hmm.
would. So it's I get the signs from above, we could say,
Yeah.
that I'm doing the right thing.
Oh, that's good. That's great. This is it, and what you're talking about, I think, is really important because whether we're talking about the type of work that you're doing or what a lot of the other folks are doing, with food pantries and clinics and clothing rooms and all of those type of things that are really kind of uh, meeting people at those most basic levels of humanity and need can really just weigh on people, and people can suffer from fatigue of,
Yeah.
like, I forgot what there's
Compassion
a
fatigue.
compassion fatigue, right?
Yeah.
In my previous call, we would go over to the truck stops, and people living in the parking lots of truck stops because that's where the food is, the showers and the laundry are, and a warm place to stay or a cool place to stay for a while. And I just remember early on having to get over, like, the shock of it and be like, okay, at the end of this, I'm going to get in my nice car with and go to my nice house. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And at the same time, to also still have compassion and to say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what I can do, is I can be there with these folks and try to connect them with things that they may need. But at the very least, I can see their humanity. I can
Mhm.
spend time with folks. I can learn people's names, their stories. I can share a meal with people and remind them of their humanity,
Yeah.
that they're not just a statistic or a label or whatever. No, they're a person, just like anybody else.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the basic formula for trying to make a difference. I'll throw in one more thing, and I know it's something that you've done, is we need to speak to our elected officials about this issue
Yeah.
because they are, in many cases, not always, but they are clueless about
Right.
homelessness. And if we have these stories and this at least knowledge from what we've seen, we need to talk to our elected officials and insist that this becomes something that they will do something about because they do have that power. And for anybody who's rolling their eyes right now, going, "Oh, Diane, you're such a Pollyanna," I was a part of a few endeavors that took our volunteers and made a difference in Springfield, Illinois, or in Washington, D.C., and
Hmm.
got some laws passed and
Yeah.
have made some progress on that. So it does work. It takes work, but it does work, and it takes a lot of us who feel that homelessness and poverty are gross injustices that
Right.
can be fixed. This is not something that we can't fix.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I don't remember the exact location, but I believe there's a community in Sweden. I could be wrong on this, that the community had decided that there would be no more homelessness. And so this was a community decision and a community effort. And so this is where they took it and they actually did, they made the necessary changes in order to make sure that they could accomplish this goal. And so the important thing about that is not just saying, hey, we're going to get rid of homelessness without any type of actual plan of action,
Yeah.
a feel good type of thing. Um, but they actually then said, okay, well, if that's literally what we're going to do, then what laws need to change? What services need to change? How do we need to change, how policing is done, how education is done, how, they just went through all of the different things of how society interacts and said, what needs to change because we made this a priority. And so
Mhm.
very systemic type of changes that were overall, and they were able to accomplish this goal. There is no homelessness in that community or whatever size of that exists. And it was a Nordic country, and I know that part of this is the difference, having lived in a Nordic country for a year. There's also a difference of a communal understanding versus very individualistic, which we have here in the United States. But there's more of the sense of communal belonging that happens, and that's a part of it as well. But I wanted to emphasize that because that really kind of speaks to what you're saying, is it's possible to do this. And it starts with this decision that, hey, we got to do this.
And I will also throw in just a little caveat that when you get a law changed or a series of laws changed, you have to be vigilant to make sure they're followed and
Right.
enforced. And with the homeless education law that I was very involved with and still am, there's still school districts and areas and states that somehow just think that it's the law, but we don't need to go by it. And
Right.
it's like, oh wait, no, it's
How
the law.
convenient, right?
It's the law, and you really do need to follow it. And don't make me mad because
Right. Well, that goes to your the label you and Pat have, the babes of wrath, right?
stage
I
of
mean, yeah,
wrath,
right.
yeah, because it's like, no, no. So, but there's always the other little saying that I can remember is like, if you think you're too small to be effective, you've never been in bed with a mosquito. And
I love it. It's awesome.
I have been in bed with a mosquito, and it's like, I'm gonna kill that mosquito before I
Yeah.
try to get to sleep. But, it is something that people can do. And, my Hear Us website has some suggestions on there if you want to see films about families that are homelessness. There's a whole you can binge watch. I've got several of the films that I've made, and it's not talking heads, it's the families.
Right.
And there's actually a Pennsylvania film of adults that's will probably give people an eye-opening look at homelessness. And so there's information out there, there's things that people can do, but it's a matter of, we can't just give up and think that this problem's going to go away, because that's not worked so far.
Right. Right. And I want to encourage folks that especially I want to encourage folks to go to their elected officials and talk to them. One of the things I'm on the policy council of the Lutheran Advocacy Ministry of Pennsylvania. So I'm not officially representing them. I just want to say that.
Yes, okay.
But one of the things that we talk about, which is a focus on advocacy, which is about speaking for and with people, and we don't personally benefit or anything like that. It's different than lobbying. Is the idea of build relationships with lawmakers as well. That's not always about going and asking. It's just building relationships. Now, I know that can be really hard to do. I personally struggle with that with a couple of my elected officials as
I
well.
do the
So,
same.
but with those that are you can have conversations with, and even disagreements, but as long as there's a listening aspect of it, there's an opportunity to be able to share what the concerns are, and for lawmakers to hear a different voice and to hear a different perspective and say, oh, I hadn't considered it. Kind of goes back to what you were talking about, of whether we're talking about bishops or Supreme Court justices or anything else like that, for people to invite elected officials to see for themselves. That's been a really important thing when, we would invite people to come to the truck stop to meet folks and hear their
Yeah.
stories, or we have folks come to the clinics to kind of see for themselves, like, hey, here's what goes on. And that's been a really important, and for us, it starts from a faith perspective of, why am I doing this? It because of my beliefs about Jesus and what he told us to do, and all those type of things. That's what advocacy is, a form of discipleship in that.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. And that's one of the things that's going to be a byproduct, hopefully, of my new book, the Three Melissas book, is that I have a project all sketched out already, and I've done a pilot effort to mamas and mayors, and having
ooh,
mothers who are experiencing homelessness go and talk to their mayors.
oh,
And
nice.
and there's a way of doing it that can be very, very helpful and eye-opening for the mayors, who think homelessness is all just about the scruffy guy in the corner, and
Right,
they haven't really thought about mamas being homeless. So it's,
right.
we keep trying, and we keep doing what we can do to advocate and to open eyes and open hearts.
So, Diane, we're at the end of our time. So, very briefly, I know this went really quick, right? It's what, an hour, all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, it's time. If people want to reach out to you, or you've mentioned a couple of your books, if they want to find out more information about those, how can people find out more about Hear Us, or about you, or contact you?
Well, it can all happen right on the Hear Us website, and it's HEARUS.us. So it's, or they can Google my name and get to the same spot. And you'll find all the information you need, and you can reach out to me and get, find out about books, videos, and all that.
And I'm sure you're always happy to take donations as well.
Oh, I would probably
Yeah,
figure
I'm
out
sure
how
you
to
would.
do that.
I'm sure it would not go to waste.
No, no, yeah.
Diane, thank you so much for being my inaugural guest
I
on,
feel
and
like
it's
there
been a
should be a
wonderful.
plaque now on your wall
That's
there.
right. Each guest, I can put a plaque up. That's, there you go. Right, because right now it's just a plain wall. I'm
Yeah.
working on that. I got I'm working on what should be behind me. So I want to thank you, and for the folks that are listening or watching, please know that our next show is going to be July 21st. It's at 2 p.m. Eastern, and my guest is going to be Zachary Elwood, who has a book. I'm in the process of reading it right now, How Contempt Destroys Democracy.
Ooh,
So I am looking forward to having a conversation with him about that idea of contempt and polarization and all of that type of stuff, and religion and politics in the midst of that. Again, you can send us comments, questions, by us, I mean me. That was a royal us. At contact Impolite Company at gmail.com. And if you want to support the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com, and it's /Impolite Company. So it's IM Polite Company. And or you can support the church that I am the pastor of, and the director of the health ministries, christharrisburg.org. Otherwise, I encourage folks to listen to some of the other shows on gcpr.live, and you can follow along on Facebook, YouTube, all those other places. So with that, I wish you all well, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
okay. Thank you, Matthew.